Today we're going to talk about properties of an isosceles triangle. Before we start with properties, let's get a definition. An isosceles triangle is a triangle with two congruent sides. Now, isosceles triangles may look different because you can have an acute triangle with two congruent sides, a right triangle with two congruent sides, or an obtuse triangle with two congruent sides. All can be isosceles as long as two sides are congruent, so they may look a little different at times. The first theorem we're going to talk about with isosceles triangles is the isosceles triangle theorem, and it states if two sides of a triangle are congruent, the angles opposite them are congruent. Now let's take a look at this triangle ABC. Let's say we know that AB is congruent to AC. Let's mark those sides congruent. Then, by the isosceles triangle theorem, we also know that the angles opposite of those congruent sides are also congruent. So let's take a look at the angle across from AB, which is C, and the angle across from AC, which is B. We now know that those two angles are in fact congruent by the isosceles triangle theorem. Now this theorem also has a converse theorem. Now remember, a converse, or a converse of a statement, is when you switch the if and the then and change around your statement. So let's see what it looks like. The converse of the isosceles triangle theorem is if two angles of a triangle are congruent, the sides opposite them are congruent. So let's again take a look at triangle ABC. Let's say I start with angle B is congruent to angle C. Then, because these two angles are congruent and these are our base angles, that means that side AB and AC, or the sides across from these congruent angles, are also congruent. So AB is congruent to AC. Now, isosceles triangles also have some interesting things when it comes to altitude. So let's take a look at that as well. Altitudes of isosceles triangles. Now, the altitude to the base of an isosceles triangle bisects the vertex angle. So let's take a look. If I have this triangle A, B, C, and I have altitude CD drawn in, remember an altitude is always perpendicular to the side across from the vertex which it begins, then that means that angle ACD is congruent to BCD. So what this did was CD bisected this whole angle here. So let's highlight this. This whole angle here, or ACB, was bisected. So ACD is congruent to BCD. Okay? Now, let's take a look at another property that altitudes have in isosceles triangles. The altitude to the base of an isosceles triangle bisects the base. So let's take a look at the same triangle and the same altitude. We're going to have the same givens here. Altitude CD, again, altitudes are perpendicular, will automatically bisect this base. So this base, AB, was cut in half. So that means that AD is congruent to BD. So those are all the properties of isosceles triangles. Now that we know these properties, we can use them in proofs. We just have to make sure we write them correctly. So make sure all of these notes are taken down on the sheet that you got in class, and if you have any questions, we'll go over them tomorrow.